I'll be seen as a patriot.
Okay, before we start, we've got to say this. We're gonna talk about a lot of stuff that happened in Spider-Man Far From Home, meaning there will be major spoilers for the movie. So if you didn't watch the film yet, what are you doing online? Go watch the movie and come back later. So we all know what happened in the new Spider-Man, and we all know the major bombshell that was dropped at the end of the movie. We think that the major reveal wasn't just meant to set up the next Spider-Man film, but Phase 4 and beyond. And we think it all leads to the Dark Avengers arriving in the MCU. And we've got some ideas for how it'll all go down. The mid-credit scene in Spider-Man Far From Home was shocking, and not only because of the return of J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. Multiverse confirmed, we guess? But because of the big twist at the end where Mysterio revealed to the whole world that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. But that's not all. Mysterio and the other disgruntled ex-employees of Stark Industries created a fake video showing Peter ordering Edith to execute civilians, which of course now makes Spider-Man public enemy number 1. The last thing Quentin Beck told Peter before his death is that people will believe anything, and we think that all of this will have massive consequences that'll be echoed throughout all of Phase 4 and beyond. After the Avengers save the universe in Endgame, we think it'll make sense that the MCU goes back to the basics. Sure, it'll be fun to see huge and massive cosmic threats like Galactus, but if we're being honest, it'll be smart to scale things down a bit and have the heroes face some Earth-based villains for a change in the next Avengers movie. And the Dark Avengers fit that bill perfectly. It'll be awesome if the Phase 4 films will establish the Dark Avengers, the same way Phase 1 did with the original Avengers, with Avengers 5 being the big crossover movie where the new Avengers face off against the Dark Avengers. Most of you know who the Dark Avengers are, but for those who don't, we got you covered. The Dark Avengers are a team of villains who disguise themselves as established heroes, pretending not only to be the good guys, but actually the heroes themselves, and they were assembled by Norman Osborn. The Dark Avengers were a breath of fresh air in the comics, and the storyline led to some amazing moments, including the complete reinvention of Norman Osborn, making him one of the most interesting and complex villains we ever saw in Marvel Comics. For a long time, Osborn was known as the Green Goblin, but as part of the Dark Avengers, Osborn got his hands on an Iron Man suit, as he decides to become the living embodiment of both Captain America and Iron Man, calling himself the Iron Patriot. Osborn starts working for the government, as he becomes the head of H.A.M.M.E.R, a replacement for S.H.I.E.L.D, and eventually forms the Dark Avengers. We are sure Norman Osborn will be a great addition to the MCU, and could be the next fan favorite big bad. Besides, having a team of bad guys who are all unique in their own way, each with different powers, costumes, and motivations, is something we've never really had in the MCU. Let's be honest, usually we get one main bad guy with a whole bunch of henchmen or just a CGI army that serves as cannon fodder for the heroes. That won't be the case with the Dark Avengers, where each member is unique and different. The only issue with the Iron Patriot is that the MCU already used that character in Iron Man 3, and during the climax of Avengers Endgame, we saw that Rhodey's new armor once again has the Iron Patriot look. So it's possible that Norman Osborn will need to go by a different name and look in the MCU. Maybe his armor could be green, as a wink to the Green Goblin, or maybe Osborn will simply take Rhodey out and use his armor for himself. Regardless of how it goes down, we really hope to see a comic book accurate Norman Osborn in the MCU. In the comics, the Dark Avengers are established following the events of the Secret Invasion storyline. Osborn becomes a hero as he uses the Thunderbolts to fight against the Skrulls. This eventually leads to the public seeing the villain as a hero, and Osborn is able to assemble the Dark Avengers. While the MCU has clearly taken a very different direction with the Skrulls, the story from the comics could still come into play in Phase 4, but with a huge twist. Think about it. What if Osborn finds out that Nick Fury and other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents are actually Skrulls? If the public learns about this, it could cause a serious outrage and mass hysteria as people find out that there are shape-shifting aliens who can look like anyone they want living on Earth. While the Skrulls are mostly good in the MCU, it won't be too hard for someone like Osborn to turn people against them. The realization that anyone could be a Skrull could create serious distrust among our heroes that Osborn could use to his advantage. Osborn could claim that Spider-Man was replaced by a Skrull, and using Mysterio's lie, he could say that what happened in London and Far From Home was an attack by the Skrulls. This way, he could turn the public on the other heroes by claiming that the other Avengers have been replaced by shape-shifting aliens. It won't take long for people to turn on who they thought were heroes after that. Our heroes will be under fire as people around the world will go on a witch hunt, believing that anyone could be a Skrull and the Dark Avengers could be seen as Earth's hope against the alien shapeshifters. It'll be interesting to see how the new Avengers react to such an attack, where their own credibility and public image is in question. This wouldn't be the first time in the MCU where the heroes were under fire from the public either. In Age of Ultron, we saw that the people of Sokovia aren't big fans of the Avengers. And in Civil War, the governments of the world decided to use the Sokovia Accords to keep the Avengers in check. The Avengers were always able to bounce back and gain the public's trust again, but it could be much harder if people believe that the Avengers have been replaced by Skrulls. The Skrulls aren't the only aliens that Osborn might target either. In Avengers Endgame, we learned that the surviving Asgardians had found a new home on Earth. The same happens in the comics, and in the Siege storyline, Osborn ends up using the Dark Avengers to start a war against New Asgard. It's very possible that we could see something like that happen in the MCU. Most fans will agree that movies like The Winter Soldier, Civil War, and Black Panther are some of the best offerings from Marvel Studios, and for good reason. One of the many things that made those films so good is the fact that they tackled political and racial themes and explored them in a superhero world. Those films did not shy away from current events, something that allowed them to stand out because it wasn't about just saving the world. It was about a clash of ideologies and beliefs. A Dark Avengers movie could fall in line with those other great MCU films. It's also important to remember that following the events of Endgame, we're not even sure if the Avengers are even a team anymore. After all, both Iron Man and Black Widow are dead, and Captain America is a bit too old to be doing any avenging at this point. Thor has clearly joined the Guardians of the Galaxy, so he's away on his own journey, and we can assume that Hawkeye's retired now that his family is back. That leaves only Professor Hulk, and while Hulk is being loved by the public now, it won't be too hard for Osborn to turn people against him again. After all, not too long ago, the public saw Hulk as an uncontrollable monster, and a bit of deceit and fake news could once again make people fear him. It'll also be interesting to see Osborn going after Hawkeye, who has pretty much become the Punisher. Well, Ronin in the 5-year time jump following the snap. Sure, all those people Ronin killed were bad, but they're still people nonetheless. If his actions become public, people might actually call for Clint's arrest. We have to assume that the Sokovia Accords are no longer in effect following the events of Endgame, but with Osborn turning the public on our heroes, we're sure world governments might not only bring the Accords back, but the laws against superheroes might become far less forgiving. A lot of the new heroes have godlike powers and super advanced technology. With Osborn using the Skrull threat to cause hysteria and mistrust, the Dark Avengers could actually be called upon to arrest other heroes. It'll be interesting to see which villains actually join the Dark Avengers, considering the fact that Marvel Studios tends to adjust their stories from the comics to work better with their movies. Using some members of the Dark Avengers in the MCU might prove to be trickier than others, so we think it'll make a lot of sense if we'll see some new faces on the Dark Avengers roster. In fact, we won't be surprised if the MCU's Dark Avengers won't be a team of villains who disguise themselves as the Avengers, but instead are villains who pretend to be whole new heroes, similar to Mysterio, who claimed to be a hero from another Earth. While it would be a departure from the comics, it could make sense and allow Marvel to shine the light on some really interesting villains. Ever since the return of Thunderbolt Ross in the MCU, many fans have been hoping to see him become the Red Hulk, and the Dark Avengers will be the perfect opportunity to do just that. Ross clearly was a big supporter of the Sokovia Accords, and we don't think the events of Endgame changed his mind much. Besides, both Iron Patriot and Red Hulk were part of the Thunderbolts team, and a mix between the Dark Avengers and the Thunderbolts sounds pretty cool to us. It's also important to remember that Sentry was part of the Dark Avengers in the comics, and this would not only be a good chance to add him to the MCU, but it would also give the Dark Avengers a seriously powerful weapon to use against heroes like Thor, Hulk, Captain Marvel, and Doctor Strange. Sentry is actually considered to be one of the most powerful heroes in Marvel Comics, and he's kinda like Marvel's version of Superman. All of this and more has got us really excited for the Dark Avengers, and we hope that Marvel Studios are already working on finding a way to add the team in Phase 4 and beyond. Do you think it's time for the Dark Avengers to join the MCU? Who do you want to see on the team? And what do you think about our ideas in this video? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, give us some love by leaving a like and subscribing to CBR. Thanks for watching!